Maybe as a start, I should introduce myself so that you have a sense of who I am and what qualifies me to be standing in front of you today talking about academic success. As I briefly indicated, I'm from the Free State. I'm South African born and raised. I left South Africa after I completed high school and essentially pursued all of my academic degrees in the US. As I went there as an undergrad, got my BA in economics, my master's in labor and industrial relations, and then my PhD in educational policy studies. So there are a few, as some of you were introducing yourselves, I could sort of see points of intersection with some of you. In doing this work, I have really had about 20 plus years of international research experience in a number of countries. Most of my scholarship has been in South Africa, in South Africa, but then over the course of time, I extended my work to include other parts of the African continent, extending as far north as Egypt, and then also have done some work in Southeast Asia in recent years. Most of my scholarly work has centered around 3, maybe 4 themes, depending on how you parcel this out. My first theme of scholarly interest centers around issues of organizational transformation or organizational change and culture. With this work, what I do is really seek to understand the ways in which organizational change or institutions foster organizational change, or foster an organizational environment that can support the interests and can support what I call historically marginalized people. The second theme that I focus my work on centers around issues of gender and leadership in higher education. And a third area of concern focuses on higher education in transitional societies. Most of the work that I have done has focused on issues of education in developing countries, all the way from developing countries on the African continent to other parts of the world. And then finally, I really try, because of my training, I'm very much an interdisciplinary scholar. I draw very heavily from other disciplines outside of education. My earlier academic work centered and emerged from the business sciences. And so I still find myself very much drawn to some of that literature and finding ways to bring it into my education research. And this is exemplified just recently. A colleague of mine and I had got a $25 million grant to create a global center for food systems innovation. And after we got this grant, somebody asked me, you know, what's this got to do with education? And I said, everything. Even though we were dealing with people in agriculture, in engineering, and dealing with food systems, there's a whole lot there that draws from education. So my entire orientation tends to be very much interdisciplinary. In thinking about who I am, I see myself as a teacher, I see myself as an educator, I see myself as a mentor. And depending on who I'm engaging with and the audiences that I'm working with, I assume these different roles. Clearly, as a faculty member over the last 15 years, I've spent a significant amount of my career in the teacher role, working primarily with graduate students. I have not had the pleasure of working as extensively with undergrads just because of where I work. My program is a postgraduate level education program. And so in this role, I really have taken very seriously the responsibility of not only teaching and delivering the curriculum that I'm charged with delivering, but most importantly, mentoring and socializing the next generation of scholars. I believe that as a faculty member, it is not sufficient, particularly when working with graduate students, even undergrads. It is not sufficient to merely replicate ourselves. It is important to make sure that we create environments where we can support, we can coach, we can teach, we can co-write, we can co-author, bring in students into some of the work that we do. I firmly believe that doing research without some level of social responsibility is fundamentally wrong. I just can't see myself coming into a country, coming into a university, coming into an organization, and conducting research and not giving back in some way. And third, I see myself as an academic leader. I fundamentally operate from the premise that people matter. So wherever I go, if I'm engaging in a research project, I have to think about how I engage with whoever I'm engaging with. If I'm doing a research study, in what ways am I going to affect, impact, influence the participants in my work? If there's a way in which I can monitor, if I can give back to those participants, what might that be? Clearly recognizing that it's not always possible for me to bring everybody under my wing, but to the extent that my work does not exploit, I firmly believe that as an academic leader and as a scholar, that is a significant responsibility. But also, in my current role as an assistant dean and in my future role as vice provost, I firmly believe that it is important to create supportive environments, certainly among the people that I work with. It is important to also be collaborative. A lot of the scholarship that I've done, certainly beyond my earlier years, has been very collaborative in that I have worked fairly intentionally to bring in scholars from South Africa, from other parts of the world where I've done work, and sought out colleagues with whom I could collaborate. I have had the pleasure and the privilege of being in an institution that has been extremely well-resourced, and I think I've taken the responsibility to share some of those resources with colleagues. I have very high expectations of myself and expectations of others with whom I work. So when I'm engaging students, would be they master's level students, doctoral level students, postdoctoral students, I believe that it is important to bring our best selves to the table. Okay. So for a minute, I would like you to talk. As I mentioned, I said in this session we're going to be moving. It's post-lunch, we're full. It could be nice for you to just sit there and just listen to me talk to you or talk at you for the next 2 hours, but we're not going to do that. You guys are going to talk. And so for a minute, I'd like you to just find a partner, the person next to you, and tell them, who are you? And in this particular, with this particular question, I would like you to address a few things. I'd like you to address two to three questions. Think about 2 to 3 questions that you hope to have answered in this session. So, find a partner. If you're sitting by yourself, at least you get to make a new friend. Find a new friend. So find a partner. And with that partner, I'd like you to identify 2 to 3 questions that you'd like to have answered in this session. Now, what I would like to have are a few volunteers to just, based on the conversation that you had, if we could just share some of the questions that you hope to have answered during this workshop.
Okay, I would like to focus on access within the South African context. I'd like perhaps your views on strategies as to how we could improve access in South Africa. And also, is there a time when we're going to stop access in South Africa, or is it going to be an ongoing requirement given the historic past in this country?
Thank you.
I'll just give you the second one, okay? Essentially, I'm looking at this in a national context. I'm not sure whether you're aware, but the percentage of staff, of faculty at universities in South Africa with a PhD is 37%. What strategy would you use to increase the number of PhDs? That's the first part. The second part is there's a dearth of black women in the professoriate and with PhDs. It is a pipeline problem in South Africa, but I want to know from your experience whether there's any fast-tracking mechanism, either through internationalization or any other means.
My question has to do with postdoctoral opportunities. One realizes that the support, financial support that one is exposed to is usually very minimal as compared to what one is currently paid in the regular job. And so it becomes difficult for some of us to leave our full-time employment and pursue postdoctoral studies.
We are thinking that we would want to have an answer to the question, how do you build a successful academic career? You have somebody who has completed his or her PhD, comes back to work, teaches at the university. How do you help that person to succeed in academia?
The question that we'd like to put on the table, the diversity of students from national context, international context, studying within the South African context, have such a vast range of reasons for why they're doing their PhD. How do you accommodate that in the designing of appropriate programs when designing PhDs? That's one. And the concern that I have particular about students who are practicing teachers in education, in schooling context largely, the difficulties and the challenges of gaining access to academia is a long-term career.
Mine is a very personal question. How do you center yourself with so many competing things?
Another personal question. Is an academic career for a young person as me, is it worth it? Is it a career whereby because it's a question I ask myself every single day. Should I leave? Should I come back? Should I do my PhD? Should I not do my PhD? Should I drop everything? Should I go to business? Do I make more money or do I fulfill, the research? So it's a toss-up between, for a young person, it's a thought we have every single day we wake up.
One set of questions sort of focuses on sort of pragmatic how-tos type issues in thinking about building an academic career and some of the considerations that one needs to take into account. And then the second set of questions, a broad category of questions, seems to focus on the more substantive academic type questions regarding a variety of topics and a variety of subjects. So as we go through, the first category of questions are probably easiest to answer just because they've been embedded in the presentation, or at least in various parts of the presentation. The second category of questions, as I said, some of them are actually going to be addressed tomorrow in a fair degree of depth. And then others, I will take them and use them perhaps as examples as I go through the session, okay? So starting maybe then with the first category of questions and looking at some of the goals of this session and the goals of this workshop. One of the things that increasingly, if we're looking at academic life in South Africa and in a lot of other countries, there's an increased focus on publishing. I mean, there's a phrase, publish or perish. You go out, you get your master's degree, you get a PhD, you enter the academy, and then there's an expectation that as part of our career and our trajectory, we will be expected to publish. So part of some of the issues that I hope we will address in this session, focusing on the art of publishing. There are some things that one can do to enhance, to increase opportunities, and to enhance success in this area. And the question then goes, why do we publish? I think it is important. We're coming in, particularly I'm listening to the brother at the top who's saying, is this worth it? Is this something that I want to do? And then the short answer would be say, yes, you do. This is something you want to do. It's fantastic. Being an academic is fabulous. But why do we publish? Why do we do what we do? And then understanding the process, because a lot of times we come into a university, you get your position as a lecturer, as a senior lecturer, as an assistant professor, and they say go off and publish. And a lot of times we don't even quite understand what the process entails. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time unpacking that process. And this can range, in unpacking the process, we'll draw a number of examples, because I want this to be tangible and hopefully meaningful and relevant. Some of you, there's somebody who just graduated with their, a very recent PhD. What do you do with or somebody who's graduated with a master's thesis? What is it that you do with this document that you just spend many, many, many months, in some cases years, putting together? What is it that you unpack? We have a few postdocs in the room. So as you think about your work, how do you then generate some meaningful work and some meaningful publications from a thesis or a dissertation? And the types of articles that one can draw and can pull from these documents that we're going to spend so much time writing. And also really highlighting, while I cannot claim that there's a formula, but there are certain critical things that one needs to think about when putting together an academic article. By that, just generally have to be touched upon in order to put together in a publishable article. And where to publish? What are the outlets that one needs to think about? And then finally, then thinking about, again, once you do that thesis or you do that dissertation, are there ways in which one can take that dissertation, revise it, and then eventually publish it into a scholarly book? So some disciplines value books more than others. So one has to think about what academic disciplines you're emerging from. So in thinking about this next question, maybe before I go to the next question, before I project this on the screen, just take a minute, and this, if you could just volunteer here again. What are your key concerns about publishing? If you think about those of you who have either published, those who have not published but would like to publish, what are the issues that you're most concerned about?
Getting your work to refereed journals.
The refereed journals, getting it out to the relevant outlets.
I always believe it's probably easier to choose a life partner, or husband or wife, than a supervisor. So, while it's lighthearted, you probably can basically be suicidal if you choose the wrong supervisor. So
It can be challenging. It can be a challenge.
Yes, so the question is that how do you choose a supervisor even against challenges within a department or university where you're sometimes forced into areas that you don't want to be in?
Yeah.
And how you deal with that?
That's
I think it's important because
really
of
important. Yeah, that's a really good question.
It's a comment. Having only recently just got my PhD,
Yes.
beginning of last year, if I could do it again, I'd do it by publication. I would submit my PhD as a publication, as a series of publications. It's a no-brainer for me in retrospect.
So lesson learned.
It's something that has to do with the high rejection rate, especially refereed journals, and you honestly get discouraged. It gets back, and you just lose. So rejection rate is very frustrating.
Okay. So let me pause here with this first, set of questions, and I'll actually maybe take these out of order a little bit, and start going back a little bit and talk about for students here who are either in a master's program thinking about a PhD, choosing the supervisor. That is an absolutely critical point, the doctoral supervisor, because the process of choosing that person, this is essentially somebody that you're going to spend a significant amount of time with for the next anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on how well that process goes. Of course, then it also depends where you do your PhD. The South African, the European model is slightly different from the US model. In the US model, when you apply into a program, and a program that has a certain number of years of coursework, typically about 2 years of coursework, before you are admitted as a PhD candidate. And it is during that process of doing coursework where you might initially come into a program assigned, typically we would assign students a temporary advisor, with the understanding that somewhere in the course of that 2-year period, you will then identify somebody that you wish to work with because of common research interests, et cetera. That's one model. Even within the US, there's quite a bit of diversity. In some programs in the US, you still have coursework. Just about all of the US programs have some amount of coursework. So you do coursework. Even if you come into a PhD program with an advisor already identified, you are not a candidate until you have passed comprehensive exams. And in most US programs, comprehensive exams will come at some point near the conclusion of your coursework. After you pass your comprehensive exams, then and submit your proposal, only then are you a candidate, and then you spend the remaining 2 to 3 years working on your thesis and or your dissertation. So that's one process. So in a way, you have a little bit of time to actually go in, take courses with a number of different faculty members, get a sense of who they are. Maybe the one that you thought was going to be V1, you discover that they're not the one. But there's an opportunity to move out of that process. Now, in other systems where you have to declare and commit to the relationship on the front end it can be really challenging. One of the things that I always encourage, even both within the US system and here, is if students have an opportunity, before you commit to a program, it is really important to go and visit. Go and meet the faculty member before, because a lot of times I find that students at the master's level are shopping around for programs. They really, really like Professor so-and-so's work, but they actually have never taken the time to go and visit Professor so-and-so to find out if sometimes there's sort of an energy that goes on between yourself. You can just go into a meeting and know that this is not going to work very well. So one of the things that I strongly encourage, particularly I've served on a number of committees as an external advisor on a fair number of South African theses and dissertations. And so one of the things that I always tell people, go and meet the faculty before you, if you think you want to come and do a PhD at UKZN, come and visit. And I know that for some people it is not always feasible. You know, you live in Bloemfontein and you're really, really interested in a program in UKZN, and maybe you don't quite have the time to come and do it. But that's probably the one visit that you will make that has the potential to save you a whole lot of years of misery. Because then you can assess each other on the front end. And one of the things that I always encourage people to think, if you're thinking about visiting, visit with a purpose. And when I say visit with a purpose, come to the environment, to the visit and say, you know, I'm thinking about doing a PhD. I have not made a commitment yet. However, these are the two areas that I'm thinking about. I'd like to learn a little bit more about your program, how you work, have a sense of who that potential supervisor is. So if you're thinking about, you know, is the PhD, is the master's the next step, is the PhD the next step? One of the things that I always say is, yes, faculty members might not necessarily get the highest salaries in the industry, but there's so many other privileges and opportunities that come with being an academic. You don't become an academic for the money. That's a given. We're not starving, but we're not going to be wealthy like our peers in industry. But why do academics become academics? You know, one of the things that I would like to hope is that we enjoy, you know, studying, we enjoy learning, we enjoy answering critical problems, we enjoy addressing critical issues. That's what drives you into becoming an academic. And there are a lot of opportunities. There are opportunities, maybe a lot is maybe overstating it here, but there are opportunities to engage not only with colleagues at your own institutions, colleagues at other institutions who share similar interests, colleagues at other universities outside of the country who share similar opportunities. So there's space to have a fairly viable academic career that is not solely bound to, you know, the one institution where you happen to be involved. Absolutely. And maybe on the question of rejection rates, even the best of us get rejected. I've been publishing for many, many years, and I don't know if one ever gets used to the idea of being rejected, but rejection happens. It just is part of the game. And so as we go through, it's actually one of the issues that we will sort of identify here. But in doing this workshop in other contexts, one of the issues that people have raised were, you know, lack of time. I have to take care of my kids. I have to teach 300 students a class. I don't have time to do my research. I don't have time to put together that article. I have competing demands. Somebody raised the same issues. I don't quite understand what the process entails. I don't know where to submit. High rejection rates. I don't have writing support. So, I mean, you've really raised a lot of the issues that are listed here on this yellow circle. But maybe before we get into, because then we can unpack and say, what is it that we do with some of the issues that you've raised? Why do academics publish, right? Why do we do what we do? Knowledge dissemination. I would like to believe that when we publish an article, you're not doing it just to get tenure, you're not doing it just to get promotion. There is something meaningful and useful that you want to convey in that article or through that piece of scholarship. When you do a research study, there's a gap in the literature, in policy, in theory, in practice that you hope that your work will be able to contribute to in some meaningful way. And at many universities, we're finding that publications are one of the key metrics that are used in promotion. Yesterday, when Professor Renuka Vital was talking about teaching as one of the critical metrics that are used at this institution, at least another track to publication. But at many universities in South Africa and elsewhere, publication and the ability to do research are still very high, ranked very high as a metric for promotion. So if you're looking at applying for grants, a lot of times foundations will fund people who demonstrate some track record of publication, even if you've not had a grant before. But if you demonstrate that through your scholarship you've been able to publish, funders are more likely to support you and to support your grant, provided the grant proposal itself is solid, when you've demonstrated this track record of being a solid scholar. And really, others will argue that, publications lead to other opportunities. If you're a published scholar and people know your name through your scholarship, you're more likely to attract really, strong students. It makes it a little bit easier to collaborate with colleagues at other places because of name recognition. And it has the potential to provide new directions for scholarship and publication. I mean, in my own scholarship, I can give numerous examples where people, colleagues who've now turned out to be wonderful collaborators and partners just got on the phone and said, I read your article such and such. Are you interested in collaborating with me? I'm applying for such and such a grant. And based on the work that you did, are you interested in working with me? Would you like to come and be a keynote speaker at the conference based on the work that you've done? So there's value to doing the work that we do beyond just publication and beyond just promotion. Yes, it's self-serving, but it also provides other opportunities. So for the young man who's still not sure, I hope we're building an argument here, right? But institutionally, so there's sort of a self-serving dimension to why we publish, why we do what we do. But there's also an institutional dimension where oftentimes many universities will have awards, and they will use, frankly, they use all of our work to go out and get money and get other things with our names, right? We all work for the university. So a lot of times universities will actually use the records of their faculty members, the publication and the scholarly records of their faculty members to pursue other opportunities, such as funding, such as recruitment, et cetera. And so, but I think at a fundamental level, if we think of the university or the business of the university is preparing the next generation of scholars, the next generation of scientists, the next generation of business people, that research is intended to really inform the practice that we do in the classroom. We do research so that we can be better informed, we can be better at what we do, we can inform our students in different ways. We fill particular gaps in the literature, we fill particular gaps in the scholarship through our work. So in an ideal sense, the research should be informing and should be integrated with the work that we do. And one should really see that nexus between research, practice, and scholarship. Okay? So there are challenges, and in a minute we'll get to some strategies. There are challenges in academic publishing. I've identified some of them. One of the biggest challenges, and one of the things that I learned in all of the work in all of the publishing that I've done is that there are some unwritten rules. Somehow other people seem to know how these things worked, and I was the only one who didn't know how it all worked. And they just knew, and I kept asking, so how exactly do you do this? And they said, well, you don't know. Like, I was like, I don't know. So, but everybody seemed to know except for me. So there were rules, and then there were rules. And just over time and through trial and error, you sort of uncover, like, oh, when you write that cover letter to the editor, it's really, really important to be very clear about what your scholarship, what your article, what the argument that you're building. But it wasn't written anywhere. I just sort of discovered it over time. And one of the things is that the academy is very hierarchical. And because the academy is very hierarchical, whether we like it or not, if we're academics, we are being ranked, we are being compared to others either within our departments, within our universities, within other universities, within our disciplines. If you go to any conference, there are all kinds of awards that we give ourselves. You know, we give each other awards, you know. So it's hierarchical, and those awards are based on, well, you know, superiority in some ways. If you get, you know, the best dissertation of the year, that means that year you were great. You did wonderful work. So the academy by its nature is a very hierarchical system. And there's constant pressure to publish and in all of these journals. And in a minute, again, we will take time and just think about what are some of the strategies that one can begin to engage in. And also, when we're looking at tenure and promotion criteria, a lot of times, many of those requirements for tenure and promotion are built on one's ability to demonstrate success in research and publication. One of the issues that's really challenging, and I think somebody raised the issue, is how long it takes from the time you submit an article to the time it comes out. On average, 2 years. From the time you submit an article to the time you see it in print, 2 years. So if you know that your annual review or your pre-tenure review, your promotion review, you want to go up in 2 years, you don't start publishing now. You should have started 3 years ago, because it takes just that long. Between rejection, the length of time that reviewers take to review and return, it can take up to 2 years. So, challenges, but it can be done. We do have strategies for success. People have published very successfully. So it's not like these are insurmountable challenges. So how do we begin to think about our writing? One of the things that I always encourage and invite people to do is to be selfish. When it comes to your writing, you've got to be selfish. Make time to write and protect that time like a hawk. When I started as a PhD, some of you just recently, like we have a couple of people who just recently graduated. One of the things that I did, I wrote every single day, Monday to Monday. And it was in my calendar. It didn't matter what was going on. My family knew not to touch my door when it was closed during my writing time. I love you, but do not come in. And it wasn't a lot of time. Sometimes, some days of the week, I still have to have a life. I still had to teach. I still had other responsibilities. I still had a family that I had to take care of. But I wrote every single day, Sunday, Monday included, weekends included. During the week, because I'm a morning person, I had to get up before 4 o'clock. I got up at 4 and wrote before I went to work, 4 to 7. That was my writing time. Every day, my first couple of years. I was a new assistant professor. I had a dissertation that I could use and mine and write from. And I was terrified that if I didn't publish, I was going to perish. So I had all kinds of stresses that all of you have to publish and get work out of that dissertation. But I protected my writing during the weekends because I didn't want to just not have any fun. So I did the same thing. On weekends, I didn't wake up at 4. Maybe I woke up at 7, so at least I could sleep in a little bit on the weekend. But I wrote before I went out and did things, family things. But you've got to protect your time. As I went through my career, I didn't always have the luxury to sort of protect it that way. As I became an administrator, and I assumed more responsibilities and other different types of responsibilities. But I still protected. I didn't have the large blocks of time. But if I wrote, now what I do is I have 2 long days where I can afford to block. I have shorter periods of time during the week, and then I protect a long day where I can sort of sit down and really do some concentrated writing. And even when I didn't feel like it, believe me, on some of those days I didn't want to write. I didn't want to wake up at 4 o'clock and write. The ideas didn't flow. Sometimes all I put on paper were 3 paragraphs in a 3-hour block of time because they just did not flow. But I got up and I wrote. So you have to figure out what works for you. figure out a schedule that works for you, what's realistic given child demands, given parenting demands, given work demands, and protect your writing time. Okay? One of the things that I have found really critical and very, very helpful is setting timelines for myself. When you're writing, when you're writing for an article, there's nobody sitting there telling you that it's due next week. You know when it's due. You know when you want to get it done. Now, for people who just finished either master's thesis or dissertations, one of the things that I found really, really helpful was that I got 4 articles out of my dissertation the first semester I was an assistant professor. And it's not because I had extra time and all of that. But one of the things that I did, my strategy that first semester was I needed to get 4 articles, and it was an article a month. So if you think about it, a typical article is 25 pages, right? And you're with a dissertation on a thesis, you already have the work written. It's not like you have to start from scratch. It was already there. So what you are doing is taking, a chunk of your dissertation, a chapter or a section or parts of sections, because you find that you have to move things around to actually make it an article that makes sense. You have to maybe add a few more articles here and there to make it a cohesive argument. But you already have an argument that you started, that you already spent quite a bit of time doing when you were working on your thesis, on your dissertation. And so because I knew and I was told fairly early that it takes up to 2 years, I was just terrified. I thought, at least if I get rejected, then I'm already into the 2-year span. So I had to get those articles out early. So don't sit on it until you feel good, because writing is not easy for any of us. So if you don't feel very motivated, start with the stuff and I started with the article that I really liked the most. It really motivated me. There are certain sections of my dissertation that really just got me fired up, and that's where I started. Put that section, and once that got going, it was a little bit easier, because I then see progress. So in September, I had an article, end of September, end of October, end of November, end of December. I had 4 articles the first semester. And that was my dissertation finished and in the pipeline. It's no use if it's beautiful and sitting on your desk. They weren't perfect. They weren't perfect. Every single one of them got to revise and resubmit. That's a good thing. I will explain it in the process. So you can either get rejected outright, it's mismatched, they don't like it. You can get a revise, resubmit, and they usually hurt your feelings because they're giving you feedback that you don't like and you thought it was so great and it's not so great. And then, or you can get accepted. In the entire 15-and-a-half-year career, I've had 3 articles accepted outright. So, and I've had lots rejected. I won't say how many, but but I'm saying that the idea that you submit an article and it gets accepted outright, there are always revisions. So I always say, in the publishing world, revise, resubmit is a good thing. When you see that, you take it and you go celebrate, and then you come back and look at the feedback they gave you, and you nurse the ego a little bit, and then you do the revisions, right? So, but that's a good thing, because that means somebody read the feedback, looked at your work, you got feedback, you received feedback, and on the basis of that feedback, you can revise and then resubmit it. You're not rejected. That's a good thing. And for some people, you know your rhythm. You know what works for you. For some people, working, a writing group is fantastic. And it keeps you accountable. Some of us don't manage our time very well. And if we don't have external, incentives, we find other excuses to use our time. And sometimes it's not excuses, it's just that, life takes over and it's easier to do it next week. And then before you know it, it's 6 months and you're still on page 13, So, but sometimes it's life takes over. And so having that group of people that can keep you accountable, you meet every 2 weeks, or you meet whatever works for the team and works for you, do it. Because you want to be able to move the agenda forward, right? So if joining a writing group works for you, go for it. It didn't work for me. I'm more of a solo writer. But I did have a team of people. When it was done, I could send it. I say, hey, can you give me feedback before I send it to my reviewers? And I did the same for them. So whatever works for you. And one of the things that this idea never quite worked for me, but for other people it worked. I had a colleague who would take off, she would call it, what she would say, a writing vacation. And she would go for a week, or a couple of weeks, every so often, like once a year, a couple of times a year she would go. And she would take a writing break and she would come back, and when she came back, just things were just done. And so instead of going on vacation on the beach, this was her vacation. And she protected that time. She wasn't available on email. She wasn't talking on the phone unless it was, she just was not available. But for her, having that intense, she said it really helped have that intensive time without any distractions, where she would bring her works in progress, and when she left with finished products. So if that's something that you can accommodate in your lifestyle and in your, whatever works for you. And collaboration, I have a partner. When I started as an assistant professor, I had a partner, and when I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, I didn't know this individual. We met there. We were both, she was a couple of years ahead of me, but we've had some similar research interests. So what we did, we started working together on a couple of pieces. I left, went to Michigan State. She left, went to the University of Texas went to Texas. And even though we were gone after that first year, we collaborated for 8 years. And this was a very productive collaborative relationship. We found we had very similar very similar working styles, very similar writing styles, very similar temperament in terms of how we approached our work. So it was a good partnership, and we collaborated. And that collaboration, I think, in many ways really pushed both of us to move forward. So it was a relationship that really worked. And also, remember that we all practice, practice, practice. We are not born writers. We only get better by doing it. If your article is sitting on your computer and you're waiting for it to get really, really perfect before you send it out, it's no use to you. You want to get it the best possible way you can, but it's not going to be perfect. And I think the sooner we all make peace with the fact that it's not going to be perfect. We get it to the best possible condition and then let it go. If it's sitting on your computer, you can't get feedback. Part of the reason you submit stuff is so you can get feedback and improve, get other people's input. If you want to make it perfect before you submit it, it'll be 2 years before you get it out. So writing is not easy, but there are ways in which you can encourage yourself to move forward with writing.
I don't know if you've come across journals that are prescriptive. You submit a paper and then they tell you what they want you to include or what they want you to add. I have a friend who submitted a paper, and then they accepted the paper, but they had these prescriptions for her to follow. Not the format and stuff like that, but they had things, yes, content that they wanted her to add. And apparently she added some and not all, and they rejected the paper.
In most journals, the paper will be reviewed by anywhere from 2 to 4 people. Now, you can imagine that when you have a product, anytime you bring 3 or 4 academics to look at it, we're all going to see different things in the paper. I'm going to see my favorite authors that you did not include. He's going to see the famous, wonderful theoretical framework that you did not include. Somebody else is going to see something else. So inevitably, when you have 4 sets of eyes, 3 to 4 sets of eyes looking at a paper, we're all going to see different things. One of the things that I always encourage when I look at even my own work, when I receive feedback, I always think about what is the feedback substantial and not moving me from the fundamental argument that I'm trying to convey. And sometimes, yes, you get feedback that's really helpful and you're just really trying to tighten that argument and sharpen it. When I get feedback of the sort where I believe, as the author, that it is really moving me in a direction that I can't even begin to understand or defend, because once it's published, it's your work now. The fact that you got feedback it's your work. And if I were ever challenged on my work, I need to be able to defend it. So if I get feedback of the sort where I feel like it's just moving me in such a direction that I couldn't even begin to defend this work, then I will not include it. And I will provide rationale, because you get feedback, then you have to, indicate what you're including, what you're not including. And when you write your letter back to the editor, that's when you address. I included these 5 things, but the number 6 and 7, I did not include for these particular reasons. Recognizing that the editor might disagree, or the reviewers might disagree, but I think that one's work needs to be true to the argument that one is trying to convey, or the scholarship that one is trying to put. So yes, it happens. Or sometimes we find ourselves, the article might go out to one set of reviewers, and then when it comes back after the revised resubmit, a lot of times journal editors will like to send it to the same set of reviewers, but sometimes it doesn't. And now you're introducing a 4th or 5th set of eyes who have a completely different perspective. And so if that happens, who knows what you're getting. So there are a lot of sort of behind the scenes and other intervening steps that might influence the decision on a paper. Ideally, you start with one set of reviewers that will take you through the entire process, from submission to first review, revision, second review, if one has to go through that process.
So basically, you can't really say your paper is accepted until it's published. Because they can accept it and reject it afterwards.
No, revise, resubmit is not an accept. If it's accepted, it's accepted. If it's accepted, it'll come and say accepted. But if it's revise, resubmit, that means you're really still, in a minute when I explain the process, you're still subjecting yourself to a second round of review after you've done the revisions. And ideally, if it goes back to the same set of reviewers, and most of the time if you've done the reviews, then you should be okay. But if it goes through to a different set of reviewers, then it's a whole different panel now. Yeah. Other questions before we get into sort of the process? Okay. So as I said, part of the process, I mean, when we were asking about why do public, journals take so long, and why is the rejection rate so high? A lot of times, and now it's wonderful because a lot of things are online, and you don't, before, if you look at a journal and you were thinking about submitting to journal X, whatever the name of the journal might be, one of the things that you want to look at is, if it's an accredited journal, for most of us, if you're publishing in journals that are not accredited, it can be a problem. But also then, a lot of journals will have their acceptance rates. They do it positive, they put a positive spin, they don't say the rejection rate. So if you're submitting to a journal that has a 5% acceptance rate, that means 95% of the manuscripts that are sent to it are not accepted. So that's, you do the math the other way. And so you know that you can look at that information on the front end. Now, when I started my scholarly career and started publishing a lot, I did what I called a mix. I had what I called my A journals, the ones that I knew I wanted to be in. They are the leading journals in the field. I wanted to be in those journals. And then I did what I called my B journals, so the next tier. I did not publish below my B journals. And when I say the B journals, these are journals where if I publish in there, they're refereed, they're accredited, they're respectable journals. And so when I come up for promotion and when I'm submitting stuff, I'm not embarrassed that I'm published there. They're really good journals. But they're not the ones at 5% with a 5% acceptance rate. So I had a mix of both so that I did want to get published. So while I was pursuing the really, the top 5 journals in my field, I also had other journals that I published. And as I got more established in my career, I also felt that it was important to think about diversifying where I published. I didn't just publish in US journals. Now, there were certain journals, because I am in a higher ed department, I am in comparative education, where I knew if I wanted to get promotion, I needed to publish there. There was just no question about it. So I did my best effort to publish in those journals. But because of I do international work, I needed to publish in journals elsewhere. I wasn't just publishing for promotion. I wanted to publish so that I could disseminate my work. So I published in South African journals. I published in journals in the UK. I published in journals in Australia. I published in journals in the Netherlands. And I published in journals in the US, so that my work could get out there. And some of the best scholars that I worked with were not necessarily on the kind of work that I did, were not in the US. So I needed to be able to connect with a broad network of colleagues and scholars who did similar work. So yes, I had my US, but then I had all of these other journals and allowed myself to get into a network so when you're thinking about, choosing the journal, a lot of times people say, how do I even know what to choose? One of the things that I find most helpful is that if you look at, particularly for people who just finished dissertations or even others, you have a very long list of references at the back of that dissertation. There are certain places or certain journals where you went for your scholarship. Start there. So if you're doing things on gender in higher education, look at the journals that you use for your own scholarship, preferably the recent editions of those journals, so that you have a sense of what they're publishing now. And like I said, it's easier now because a lot of these are online. And go and look at, typically before I write an article, I go and I look at maybe 3 or 4 journals where I think I might want to publish this article. And I look at the table of contents within the last year. Because what that allows me to do is scan and see which directions they're moving, what kind of scholarship they're publishing. If I submitted my work there, might it fit? One of the things that journals go through on a regular basis is they change editors. And editors come, I've served on several editorial boards, and when an editor comes with his or her team, there are certain orientations that they might have, right? So a journal might have the same editor for 5 years, and then you come in year 6 and you don't realize that the journal has changed and the editorship has changed and there's a new editor with new ideas. So you look at the most recent just to get a flavor for what is current in that journal. What are they publishing? What do they look like? And one of the things that I do, so before I publish, I even start writing an article. So I have some ideas about what I want to write about. I think about my top 2 journals where I think I want to submit this journal, or I want to submit this article, this manuscript. And then I do the perusal and give a sense of what they're publishing. And once then I've identified, if not this, possibly that, then I write. Packaging is absolutely critical. When you write an article, you want it to look like the type of article that is published in a particular journal. Because then the editor, you want to make it, I always say, make it easy for the editors. When that editor sees your manuscript, they want to see something they recognize. And if your article, right from even the packaging of the article, you want it to look like the kind of article that they could publish. Of course, the content is important. You want to, So it's important to not only think about where, but once you've identified where, how you package it, how you pull it together. So when you're thinking, so you've identified your journals, 2 or 3, give yourself a couple options. If not here, then there, then there. Now, as I said, from the time you submit a journal article to the time of publication could easily be 2 years. So maybe a month it goes out to reviewers. Now reviewers are people like me and you, including doctoral students and some of my master's students. I've let some of my students review, just so that they get to know what the process entails. So it goes out, and it goes out to you, and you get that letter that says, and I just got a nasty email yesterday saying, remember, you have a week before the review is due. So I'm not late, still have a week, but I got the email. So it goes out, and they give me, 8 weeks to review, something like that. Some are shorter, some are longer. So now you're the reviewer. have 8 weeks to review this journal, this manuscript. So that means now 8 weeks out, and if you're like me, you're probably taking it all the way to the 8 weeks. So now it's 3 months since you submit it, and you haven't heard anything. And the reviewers, and these are good reviewers, so they're gonna submit on time. So it's 3 weeks and it goes out, and then it's 3 months now. Then it goes back to the editor. And then the editor, just when yours came back, had 4 others ahead of yours. So now it's maybe another month before the editor writes that letter that synthesizes all of the feedback and writes you the cover letter. Now it's 4 months, right? Then it goes back to you. And this is a good article, so it's a revise and resubmit. So if it's a revise, resubmit, you look at it, your feelings are hurt, and the ego is a little bit bruised because they said some things that you weren't expecting. They're good things. So you take 2 weeks to compose yourself. And then you compose yourself, and then you really start writing and working on it. Maybe if it's good, then you take a month. So now it's 6 months. 6 months. You write, you're good, you send it out, and then the whole process starts all over again. Because it's a revise, resubmit, but it still has to be sent back to the same reviewers. So by the time it comes back, it's 6 months later. That's 12 months just in the review process. And this is on the fast track because people were on time, and everybody responded, and you responded quickly. You didn't take too long to do the revisions, but it's still 6 months. So that's a whole year from the time just in that review process. And then if it's really good, this time they really liked it, it comes back to you, the editor decides that, well, the reviews were great, you did what they said, and they pull it together, and then maybe they put it into the pipeline. That's 18 months on the fast track. That's on the fast track. Everybody responded on time. Now, I've served on enough editorial boards to know that we don't always respond on time like we're supposed to. So just take that same example, and then instead of responding by after 8 weeks, I was really busy, I was traveling or whatever, my child got sick or whatever, and then I'm 3 weeks late. I'm still getting harassing emails, but it is what it is, it's like, okay, there's nothing I can do. So 3 weeks later, so that, it just extends the process, and there's nothing the editor can do. They keep harassing you, so just remember, when you get invited as a reviewer, please try and honor. That's one thing I've really learned. As much as I might be up until midnight hitting the hit button, send button just before midnight, it will be there on time. Because I know how I feel on the receiving end when I'm sitting waiting for an article. I'm a new assistant professor. I'm stressed out. My chair is breathing over my neck about publications. And it was late because it took forever with the publishers. So when they ask you, please do it on time, right? So that's the process. That's why it takes as long as it does. And on the rejection rates, some journals pride themselves in being the toughest journals to get into. And if they accept 5%, that's their mark in the field for any number of reasons. So one of the things that I learned, as I said, one of the things that there are unwritten rules. One of the things that I learned very, very early in the publishing is that when I submit to an editor, sometimes it varies. With electronic submission, sometimes they don't really want that long letter to the editor anymore. They just say, submit manuscript here, and you just attach and hit send, and it goes. But if you are submitting to a journal where you have to engage with the editors in some way, one of the things that I always say is be an advocate for your work. By that I mean be very clear. Don't write a letter. If you have an opportunity to write the editor, you don't want to write a letter like this. You want to write a letter like that. And in that letter, you want to explain to yourself what your article is about, why it's important, why it matches the journal that you're submitting it to. Like I said, not all journals require that. A lot of things having moved electronically, most of them don't require that anymore. But if you ever have to address an editor, you are your best representative of your work. So you want to be front and center. So whatever you didn't say in the article that you forgot to say, you want to represent it in that letter so that after they read that letter, they know exactly what's coming, why it's important, why they should care. Because remember, you're not the only one. There are 120 other people who are submitting for the 4 spaces in a given issue. So you want yours to stand out. It's like writing a cover letter for a job. You want to say, I'm the bomb. You want to talk to me. I'm great. So even if the article is not great, but you say, look at it, at least give it a shot. Don't just reject it, right? You want to represent yourself. So use that communication with editors as a way to gain entree and to catch their attention. It becomes even more important, and to get back to the question that you asked, that with feedback, I've never received an article where all the feedback was consistent. I have 3 reviewers. 2 think it was fantastic. The other one thinks it's like the worst thing that they've ever seen. Or even if they think it was great, but even in terms of how they think I should review, very rarely have I received feedback where there weren't some areas of contradiction. They didn't have to be huge areas of contradiction, but they didn't all agree. But that's who we are. We think differently. I mean, we're in sessions here. We're talking to each other. We differ. So when you get that feedback, that's where the sifting comes in, and you're thinking, if changing one word is not going to fundamentally change the meaning of what you're saying, is that a battle you want to fight? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But if using theoretical framework X is really going to change it, then maybe that's when you need to pick the battle and say, I'm not doing that. So you have to sift through, and when you're earlier in your career, you're not quite sure, am I going to be offending them if I say no? Will they reject it if I say go in certain directions? I think as you begin to become more comfortable in your own skin and with your own work, you begin to know the areas where you want to pick the battles. Some areas are not worth it, others are. And as I said, with the manuscript, you'll get 3 decisions. It'll be revise, it'll be accept, and many of us don't get that right. And it has nothing to do with your rank, because a lot of the reviews are blind, so they don't know whose manuscript they're reading most of the time. So it'll be accept, a revise, resubmit. That's a good thing. It's a small celebration. Reject, and people get rejected for a number of reasons. You get rejected because you didn't write for the right journal. The fit. That's why I'm saying it's important to do that assessment before you submit, so that you have 2 or 3 journals that you're potentially thinking about, and really take a little bit of time. It takes a day maybe to do that perusing, if that. It takes a day just to take time and do that homework on the front end. So people get rejected because they didn't choose the right journal. It's just the fit is just not there. People get rejected because the article really needs work. It just wasn't quite ready, and it really requires significant revisions, and sometimes it's reconceptualization, sometimes the methods weren't clearly explained, so there's just something fundamentally flawed about some components of that article. So if it's rejected, think about why, and a lot of times editors will tell you why it was rejected. If it's a poor fit, they will tell you it does not fit, look at a different journal. If there's something flawed with the article, sometimes you get feedback, sometimes you don't get feedback. If you get feedback, that's great, because then you can use the feedback to revise it and clean it up before you send it, either to that same journal or elsewhere. But at least you've had the benefit of feedback. If you don't get any feedback, which sometimes happens, you can send it out and you don't get any feedback. They say, no, we're just going to reject it outright. We're not even sending it out for review. Then you have to think about, this is when you call in your really, really, really good friends, and you send it out, and you have to bribe and beg and do whatever favors you need to pull and say, look, can you look at this for me? Ideally, you should do that before you send it out, but sometimes you're in a rush and you didn't do that. That's when you call in your favor and say, look, or maybe you call your supervisor, so whoever you can trust to really be honest with you about your work. There's not one friend who'll be honest and say, this wasn't so good. They use the kindest word to tell you that the paper was really bad. So find that friend. You want some friends who will be really, really honest with you. But anyway, whatever the reason for rejection, Once your ego is a little bit healed, you need to regroup. Once you've regrouped, you need to go back to the work. Don't just let it sit in the trash and not go back to it. And revise it and rework it and then send it out. And with revisions, as I said, when I was explaining the timeline, the longer you take to do the revisions, the longer it's going to take. If you're asked to do revisions, the longer you take to do those revisions, the longer it's going to take for that article to then be resubmitted, go through that process again. So if you have the opportunity to do those revisions quickly and turn them around, it goes a long way in at least truncating that potentially 2-year-long process from submission to final publication. These days, publications now come in a variety of ways. Before, a lot of journals now are doing at least an online version of their publication before it comes out in print, which is really helpful because I just got an article accepted not too long, just about 3 weeks ago. The online version is on already, it's accepted. The print version won't probably come out for another 6 months. But in terms of demonstrating, particularly for those of us who are early, for those of you who are early in their careers, who have to demonstrate that you're making progress. If it's online, it's legitimate. You can demonstrate that it's been accepted. The online version is out while we're waiting for the print version to come through. So at least that, with the option for those journals that do online publications of their journals, that at least moves things forward and cuts down a little bit on the time. So let me pause here and see if you have any questions.
The issue about publishing has become business now. They are charging 5,000 Rand, 10,000 Rand. Others are free. What's your advice?
And there are varying costs associated with publishing. As I said, I've served and I continue to serve on a number of editorial boards, and on all the editorial boards that I work on, we do not charge anybody to publish. The only exception where charging might be involved is if you want your work preset in a particular way. For example, if they want color prints as opposed to black and white because it costs the journal more to do color prints, that's the only time we will charge. But I have never, in the 15, 16 years that longer that I've been publishing, ever pay for an article for a journal. I have been solicited online by journals to submit at a cost of whatever. And usually that's when I use my delete button very quickly. Journals charge for a number of reasons, and cost is some of some of them. But I, just as a personal philosophy, I will not pay for a scholarly journal. I have not come to a point where I feel like I need to be paying to get my journal articles published. And a lot of times when I get a solicitation, I will check and see, is this a referee journal? Is this an accredited journal? What is the reputation? How long has this journal been around? Some of them are like ones that I've never heard of before, and then I'll check around to see if this is a journal that I'm aware of. And if I'm not aware of it, I will delete very quickly. So if there's no track record that I can figure out. Others, I'm not claiming that I know all the journals in my area, but at least the ones that are reputable in my field, I'm very much aware of. And if I don't know it and I've never heard of it, I generally will not submit my work there.
Maybe it doesn't apply to all the institutions, but payment for pages is
Right.
usually covered by the institution.
Some institutions will, others won't. There's variation.
But again, if you consider the amount that that article will generate, 120,000 compared to 5,000, would you really rather not get 120,000 subsidy for an article?
I happen to work in institutions where they do not pay us for any of our journals articles. We don't get paid for publishing.
Well, I'm talking about
In South African context, I know you get subsidies. Yes. You get subsidies. Yes.
An article in an accredited journal.
Right.
Your institution gets
We'll get it.
120,000. So,
Exactly.
you know, if you compare 120,000 to 5,000 for pages.
That's what I'm saying. It depends what it is that you're paying for. If you're paying for typesetting, for example, you're paying to defer some of the costs of production. That's a slightly different issue than if I'm being paid to sort of publish the article. And like I said, for me, the biggest decision that I use to assess whether I'm going to pay or not, I have never paid for a journal article ever. But if I have to be put in that situation where I have to be making decisions about whether to pay or not to pay, I have to be thinking about, again, the quality of the journal. Is it accredited? Is it if it meets those criteria, and then I had to make it, if I were put in a situation where I had to pay, 2 to 5,000 rand versus something else, then maybe if it met those criteria, perhaps I would move in that direction. I personally have never paid ever in all of the years that I've published, not once. The criteria that I use is it an accredited journal? If it's a journal that's a reputable accredited journal that you've heard about, it is one that is respected in your field, because one of the things that's a major concern, particularly for early career scholars, is to think about you're building a career here. You're not just publishing for the sake of publishing. You want your scholarship to be known. There's a reputation associated with where you publish. I mean, you want to be known for something. So if you're just publishing just for the sake of publishing, and you're publishing in journals that might be a bit questionable, I'm not sure. I mean, for me, that's a decision that I've made for myself. There are certain journals I will not publish in. I don't care how great and how much they accept. I'm just not publishing there. So it's a decision that, even as an early career scholar, it took me a little while to get in the, maybe the top 8 journals, but eventually I wanted to get there. And granted, like I said, I publish widely. I publish in outlets, not only in South Africa, not only in the US, but in other outlets. But even in those outlets, I'm fairly attentive to the quality of the journal, because I do not want my work to be represented in places where it would be questionable if I have to be reviewed. Yeah. So that, for me, then it becomes an issue. So for the gentleman up there, if you felt like it met the major criteria, it's an accredited journal, it's a respectable journal in your field, all of those criteria, and they're asking you to pay 5,000 rand to offset the production costs, because typically that's where that money should go. And as I said, when I've served on editorial boards, the only time we would be, at least the ones where I've served, we would be asking for payment is for color copies, because then we would be offsetting the cost of production. It costs us more to produce color prints than it does to produce black and white. So if there's any payment, that's where it would go. So then if it meets for me, if it meets the academic mustard, in my head I can rationalize paying, perhaps. Yes?
I think in some fields you have to pay.
You do.
I think in some science and medical fields.
You do.
Some of the good journals that one wants to publish in, you have, like Public Library of Science.
You do.
$1,000. So, and then progressive institutions, like say the Pasteur Institute in Paris, will pay for that.
Will pay for that, exactly.
UKZN will pay a certain amount, and then you've got to sort of argue for the rest. But in South Africa, the UKZN, there's the pressure to publish in any old journal, doesn't matter the level, as long as you publish, so you get the subsidies, somewhat money-driven.
Right.
And there hasn't been enough emphasis, hopefully there will be soon, but on what you're talking about, which is publishing good articles in good journals to do good work and have a good reputation.
And that varies. I mean, even in the U.S. I mean, even in my own institution, you see variations in terms of where people publish and the mix. I mean, where it matters is when you go out for promotion. I mean, at least in my context, that you have 15 articles is immaterial if they're all D journals. I mean, it's certain institutions. I mean, some institutions it doesn't matter. The number matters, but you really have to sort of understand the context of where you're working. In the context of where I work, I mean, I can get 4 articles, and And if they're all in 8 journals, it's a very different conversation than if you have 20 articles that are in journals that are not highly regarded. So context matters here. And disciplinary, in education by and large, we're not paying for, by and large. There are variations, I'm certain. Yeah. So just here very quickly, because we've really touched on a lot of these points. Again, as you're thinking about publishing your work, there are these variations, these other factors that one has to think about. The internal factors, things that you have control over when you get rejected, versus the external factors, things that you have no control over. The fact that the journal has a backlog of articles, or that there are page limits within a particular journal that they can only do so many publications a year. Those are things that inevitably impact acceptance rates and things of that sort. Okay? And one thing I should say, really, really critical, on the purple side of this over here, be a good citizen. If you are asked to review, please agree. The more reviewers we have, the easier it makes that process and the faster it makes that process. If we have to wait for a really, really, really long time to find the right reviewer for your particular highly specialized article, it's going to take longer. So periodically when you get an invitation to review, just yes. Just say yes. It's a good thing. You're being a good citizen to the field and to the profession. And network. When you go to those conferences, over here I see a few journal editors. Go and introduce yourself and get a sense and network with those people. They are the ones who are eventually going to be reviewing your work and accepting it or not accepting it in the long run. I'm not saying go and brown nose, but at least have a sense of what they publish, what they're looking for. Are they going to be doing special issues of journals? One of the things as a new career, as an early career scholar that I did, whenever I went to any conference, I went to all the sessions with the editors so that I could learn what they were doing, what was coming up in the next year. Because sometimes they would be really friendly and you're in an unthreatening environment and you're new, they know you don't know anything yet. So they're very generous with information. So they would talk about, we're going to have 3 special issues next year. These are the special issues that are coming up. Go talk to them. Have a sense of what it is that they're going to be working on. And one of the things, actually I'd like to maybe skip here and go to the next slide. Here, out of your dissertation is a minefield. There's absolutely no reason why in that first year you cannot publish a lot from your dissertation. Does anybody have a power strip for a Mac? I can borrow. I'm running low here. But anyway, your dissertation is just a minefield for work. A lot of times dissertations have really extensive lit reviews, your chapter 2 or your chapter 3, depending. Take that, don't let that chapter just linger and sit around. You can do a review article out of that chapter and send it out. One mistake that I see people doing with dissertations is they try and take a 300-page dissertation and squeeze it into 25 pages. Not gonna work. Because you're trying to squeeze all of your findings into 25 pages from 300. Does not work. Or at least doesn't work very well. So if there's a way in which you can think about your dissertation as multiple, you were talking about if you had the opportunity, you would redo it. You would publish your dissertation as chapters or as articles rather than sort of this large document. But now that it is what it is, but if you think about how do you then chunk up your dissertation into smaller pieces that you can then farm out into a number of different articles. Yes?
A lot of the theoretical stuff that I thought about.
Yes.
But there isn't space for in a paper, perhaps.
Right.
I would have missed out on.
Yeah.
I would have thought about it, and I would have written about it in my own way, but I wouldn't have actually put it down for anyone else to read.
Right.
But I think what I'm saying is if I did do it again, I would take a good long period of time to think about how I was going to do it before I started.
Before you started, yeah.
And get that clear in my head, because you can't just, I don't imagine I would have been able to publish a series of papers. I've got about 6 out of my PhD.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to think about that without taking that time out to think about how I was going to write that series of 6
Right.
to tell a story.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. So yeah, I mean, but if, given that, I mean, you've managed to figure out a way to pull out some articles. But one of the easy ways, if you're looking at that theoretical framework, a lot of times you do these critical reviews of theory and those are critical essays. They're journals that I dedicate specifically to reviews of literature, reviews of theory. And if you target those types of journals, you know, you have chapters with lots and lots of work that you did that could very easily plug into those types of journals. And then, of course, there are empirical articles that come from your findings that you could then do and that you could submit as, you know, individual chapters, individual articles to these journals. And in thinking about, can you come in to do this for me, please? I'm about to lose power here. So before I do that, I want to make sure that I open the rest of the presentation there. But into thinking about an article, I mean, a typical article can be can range anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 words. Think maybe 6,000 to 8,000 words. That's a typical article. So if you're thinking about, you know, your dissertation is, you know, 300 pages, it's not going to fit. It's huge. And if you're thinking about, you know, so basically here you're talking about a 20, 25, anywhere from 20 to 30 pages, type double spaces. I mean, if you're 6,000 to 8,000 words, right? So, and I always say, you know, these are the components that you have to, in any article, regardless of what journals you're writing for, you know, the introduction, that's where you present that argument. Excuse me just a second. So, you know, there's certain components that come, and go to slide 13. You have your introduction, you have your theoretical or conceptual framework, you have your methods and procedures, your key findings and discussion, and then your conclusion. That's it. I mean, whether it's a qualitative article, quantitative article, clearly what goes into the content in each of these areas will differ. But by and large, that's what you're looking for in a 20 to 25, 30-page article. That's it. There is a formula. And granted, if you're doing a theoretical article, some of these things will change. But if I'm talking about if you're looking at your dissertation, other than a theoretical article or a review article, if you're doing an empirical article, these are some of the things that need to be in that empirical article. And so if you're thinking about, I mean, so if you're thinking about a 20, 25 pager, the introduction, you're talking about 2 to 3 pages. And then the theoretical framework is another couple of pages. Methods, another couple, 3 pages. The bulk of the work goes into your findings and discussion, because that's the meat of your article. And then the conclusion. That's it. There's a formula. So if you can sort of think about that dissertation chapter and say, okay, here's my findings chapter. I'm not going to submit it as is, because you'll have to borrow some things from the intro, you have to borrow some things from the theoretical framework, you have to borrow some things from the methods, not everything. And then you get into, maybe take a chapter and make that the focus of the article. In your lit review, a lot of times what I find, and this is typically when I can tell this came directly from the dissertation, the lit review is huge. I'm going to put everything that was in that lit review. And I know, like, this came direct. They want to demonstrate they know everything about this topic. That's not the point in a dissertation, in an article. You want to demonstrate your argument. The literature is simply there to allow you to frame the argument that you are trying to demonstrate with your data. You've already, so the lit review in an article shouldn't be the majority of the paper. The majority of the paper should be your work, your data. The lit review is simply there to allow you to frame the argument, and it's also there to allow you to then, when you do the discussion, demonstrate where your work fits, the contributions that you are making to this literature. That's what you use that lit review for. You don't want to do 8 pages of a lit review on a 20-page paper. You don't have room. Yeah? So if you think of it that way, I'm not, like I said, if you're doing a review article, it's a different type of article. If you're doing a theoretical article, it's a different type of article. But by and large, for most empirical articles, this is what you want to have in there. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, and if you allow yourself to sort of have a framework before you start, then you sort of plug in and fit in the pieces. I'm so oversimplifying it, I understand. But I think sometimes we get so mired and paralyzed by the fact that I have to write an article and we're just paralyzed because it has to go out for review. Yes?
Can you use the very same methods and procedures of an article that has been published? I mean, the empirical article from your thesis. And how do you avoid self-plagiarism?
What do you mean an article that's been published?
Like, for instance, maybe you have published one aspect of your findings.
Of your findings, yes.
Now you want to publish maybe another aspect of
Right,
your findings.
right.
Can you use the very same method?
I see. Yeah, oh, I see, I get it. So like if you're working from a dissertation and you're doing multiple articles from the dissertation that all essentially have the same framework, have the same, I mean, then you cite. I mean, one of the things that I always say is, this is an article that emerges out of a larger study that examines whatever. And I acknowledge the larger study. I acknowledge that the larger study was perhaps a dissertation. And if other parts of that article have been published elsewhere, I acknowledge those as well. That way, there's a trait. I mean, you're not hiding the fact that that this work comes and is part of a larger study. Yeah, that's good. We're there. That worked out nicely. So, so you're not hiding the fact that this work is associated and comes from a larger study, and I will acknowledge that right up front. This article is based on a larger study that examined blah, 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 and then I talk about the larger study. Parts in this particular article, I cite the larger study, in case it will be the dissertation, and I would cite other work that I have published that comes out of the similar. And usually with the methods, I won't be verbatim. I mean, I won't do like just copy and lift. Like even if I'm using the same idea, I just won't lift it, just do a cut and paste. I won't do that. I will, you write it in a way that, yes, conceptually the ideas come from the same place, but you just I discourage just copying and lifting, 5 times. Then it looks a little bit shady. So you would use similar language, but it won't be an exact lift from what you published in the article number 1 and article number 2 and article number 3. You would tweak it a little bit. Yep. And one of the things that I always find, any other questions before we proceed? So one of the things that I always find very helpful is thinking about where to publish. And again, your field. You have to consider what field, what discipline. In doing those earlier introductions, we had colleagues from a variety of academic disciplines. So you know what your academic discipline is. And you have to be true to the norms of your academic discipline. So, but one of the things that I always encourage people to think about is publishing in, definitely you want to be in accredited journals. It's not a good idea to be publishing in journals that are not accredited for the most part. And whether you're publishing, theoretically or whether it's thematically aligned, you want to publish in those types of journals that publish the same kind of work, theoretically or thematically. And it is really, really important if a journal is doing a special issue. One of the earlier part of my career, one of the things that I really took advantage of were special issues. I was in the US publishing on South African higher education. There weren't a whole ton of journals that were doing work on South African higher education, but in a few years, I mean, it seemed like there was sort of a time when South Africa was in vogue. There were all these transformations going on here, and a lot of journals were doing special issues, and I took full advantage of those special issues. And most of them were not just South Africa. Maybe they were thematically dealing with issues of organizational change, which is a lot of what I was doing, or issues on gender, or any of the issues that were embedded within my South Africa work. But what the special issues afforded me the opportunity to do was to then frame my work and have an outlet that was focusing on a topic that was very similar to what I was studying. So if there are any special issues, take full advantage of those and submit your work through that outlet. Okay? And one piece that I wanted you to think about is if you are working on a, this is the one that I want. Yeah. If you have a dissertation, a number of you might be interested in taking that dissertation, and in some disciplines, books are more preferred. Like I know that in the history, you have to have the seminal book. You can write a lot of articles, that's great, but you've got to have a book, at least in the US. So if books are important, or if you think that you want to publish your dissertation as a book, it is perfectly okay to then think about revising. One of the other things, I've reviewed book prospectus, and again, a lot of times people make the mistake of just taking that dissertation and plunking it as is. Can't do it. Your book has to be the style has to be a little bit different, even if it's an academic book. You can't just take your dissertation and simply submit it and as is. So, one of the examples I always give was that I got 5 articles and a book out of my dissertation. And the book was, when I had collected data for my dissertation, I collected a lot of data, some of which I never used for my dissertation. So when I did the book, then I took the advantage of incorporating so that it was a little bit, that it looked a little bit different from my dissertation. But one thing I always tell people is that my introduction of my book from my dissertation was probably the hardest chapter ever. Philip Albach was my editor. I must have sent that thing to him maybe 4 or 5 times. And finally, on the 5th time when it just took a long time. But he was a fantastic editor. And one of the things was that in a book, he said, make this read like a book. Don't make it read like a dissertation. You already have your PhD. You don't have to prove that. Be a little bit, own it a little bit. Be an authority. And I revised that. I don't think I've ever revised anything that many times. But it was great because then after we went, it was painful too. This was before the era of email or lots of email. He would send this envelope, and I would feel the envelope first to see how thick it was. And if it was really thick, then I knew that I needed a few days so I could collect myself, because then the feedback was really long and it would probably hurt my feelings. But once I recovered, from opening the envelope, it was great because he would give me really, really good feedback, literally line by line. And that's where I learned how to pull this together, because I had somebody who was an editor, what I felt like was really, really a supportive mentor in this process. But in submitting even the book prospectus, make it short, 6 to 8 pages, no more than that. And in that 6 to 8 pages, tell the editors what you're going to do. Have an annotation of the chapters that you're going to have in this book, a CV, and then a sample chapter. And I always say, bring your best chapter. If it's out of your dissertation, clean it up. Make sure it doesn't say this dissertation, this study. Make it, use some nice, flowery, liberated language. You're not writing for your thesis director anymore. You're writing for a broader audience. So if you're interested in really doing the book prospectus, that's all you need. So it doesn't have to be a super long. And a lot of times now, the directions are online. But by and large, if you're looking at what editors are looking for, they're not looking for this long, monstrous document. Keep it short, keep it straight to the line, tell them what the argument is. If you're co-authoring or you're working with other colleagues, include their bios, their CVs, and send off the package. And then, shop it around. Some publishers are, interested in certain types of books over others. So what you want is to think about where your book has the best fit, in the same way as you would an article. And if there are editors out there, when you go to conferences, go and visit them and say, hey, if you have a book idea, who's your acquisitions editor? Can I talk to them? And just shop around. You're not committing yourself. Unlike an article. An article, usually it's like you submit an article, one journal at a time. With a book prospectus, you can go to a number of, shop it around. and see what makes the most sense for the kind of book that you want to write. Okay? So thank you for participating. I'm happy to entertain more questions, within this environment or outside in the hallways while we're having coffee. And I'll be here again tomorrow, so I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you again for participating. I hope this was useful.